this video is in response to a question that I got on a different video, and the question was in two parts. It basically was asking how to overcome laziness to make sure that you're getting your training done when you're wanting to do Tai Chi training, Qigong training, etc. And the second part of the question was how to make your training and work schedule fit together. So I'm going to address both those questions. I'm going to address them in reverse order because I think addressing a schedule is a little bit easier than addressing what might be perceived as laziness. So with regards to the schedule, I will just tell you basically what I do to fit in training time. I understand it can be very difficult to find time to do training, to learn new forms, to practice the forms that you know. Before the pandemic started, to find time to train with other people, practice push hands, it can be quite tricky to get schedules to work like that. I'm in a little bit of a different situation than probably most people watching this video. I'm a full-time student, so my schedule changes every term, and I have to find typically a new time to train within each schedule. Since the lockdown started and most schooling is being done from home, that's a little bit easier, but I'll give you an idea of how I usually approach it in a usual term. Then we'll talk a little bit about how I've been approaching it since the lockdown has started. So in a typical term, once I have my schedule, I will put it all into a Google Calendar, and I block out sections for when each class is going to be. I block out sections for travel time to get to class or to get to the school, and I block out time for meals, and I take care of all of that and make sure everything's in place there so that I'm not shortchanging myself on the time that I need to get through each day and all of the activities that need to happen in that day. And once I have that all blocked out, then I look at evenings and mornings and blocks or sections throughout the day where there might be a break in activities or times when I can maybe come home early or something like that. Basically, depending on what's available, will fit in training times. And I try not to do less than 30 minutes, and I typically don't have time to do more than an hour at a time. So what I'll typically do is use my mornings for form training or Qigong training. And I will typically figure out like when I need to get up to make sure I can get ready for the day, have breakfast, get everything together that I need to have together for the day before I leave the house. And once all of that's scheduled, so I have like, okay, I need this much time to get these things done for this day, then I'll typically go back half an hour to an hour before that, and that's my time to get up and start training. And it's really important to me to make sure that sleep is prioritized. I think that sleep is something that you don't want to shortchange yourself on if at all possible. I typically do best if I get 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep in a night. I know that that's not always going to happen with my schedule, so I've set a rule for myself that on mornings when, like say I've been up late working on something and that wasn't something that was scheduled, wasn't planned, but it had to be done in a certain amount of time, so I'm up late and it cuts into my sleep. If I get less than 6 hours of sleep by getting up and training, then I'll skip training for that morning. And that offers incentive to both try to get things done in a timely manner so that I'm not up late working on things, but also lets me continue to get like a minimum amount of sleep necessary. And it also removes the guilt factor of skipping training one morning, because a lot of times what happens is, at least what's happened in the past for me before I started actually making rules like this for myself, is I would either force myself to get up super early, getting far too little sleep so that I could still get my training done, and it would throw off the rest of my day and just make me miserable. Or I would sleep in and then feel bad about it because, well, I had skipped training that morning, and that's something that I had set as a goal for myself to do at a certain time each morning. And so by giving myself this rule where sleep is prioritized, and I know that if I would get less than, say, 6 hours of sleep by getting up to train, then I know that that rule's in place, and it's not me breaking my goal, it's me adhering to the structure that I set up for myself to make sure I can get adequate training time and adequate sleep in my schedule. The other thing that I do is try to break up training sessions into smaller chunks. So instead of spending an hour and a half working on things or an hour working on whatever it is that I'm going to be training that day, I will cut that in half and do half of it in the morning if I can fit it there, and then half of it in the evening, and just try to fit in where I can fit in. If I have time at like lunch break or a spot during the day where I have an extra half hour to work on stuff, then I'll fit in a training session there. Just try not to do less than 30 minutes, and I typically don't have time to do more than an hour per session. So it's going to be somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour, and that gives me a little bit of playroom to figure out where I'm going to stick these chunks of training time. So if you're having trouble figuring out when you're going to train during the day and you have a crazy schedule, the first thing that I would recommend is make sure your time is accounted for each day. Don't leave things kind of up in the air. pull up a calendar program. I like Google Calendar, but whatever works for you, and actually block out time for everything that you're doing throughout the day. And that really does two things for you. One, it lets you see how much free time you actually have, how much time is actually taken up by things. And I mean, it can be adjusted. When you first do it, you're probably like, well, I don't know exactly how much time it's going to take to make dinner. So you give yourself maybe an hour to make dinner, and it may not take an hour to make dinner. It might take more than that, depending on what your cooking habits are. And so then you just adjust it, and it's going to take a little while to get it fine-tuned to where you can actually plan exactly how you want to. But if training is something that's important to you and fitting it in your schedule is really important to you, then this is a process that's going to be very beneficial, and you have to realize that it's not going to be an easy point and click, everything fits in place at once process. It's a process where you have to kind of work through it and figure it out as you go. But the upside is after going through that process, then it turns into kind of a point and click. Here's, I can plug these things into my calendar. I know this is going to take this much time, this is going to take this much time, and you're good to go. And then once you have everything plugged into a calendar, the second step would be to find the gaps. And you're wanting to find gaps. You want to make sure that you don't cram every single second of your day filled with something, because you do need some time to kind of, process or not actually be completely active. At least that's how I am. I feel like there are times during the day where if I give myself a gap where I don't have to be doing something, that's very restorative to me, and I'm able to be more productive. Having that non-productive chunk of time makes me more productive during the chunks of time where I need to be productive. So look for the gaps, but not like every single gap. The next thing with that is look for gaps where you have at least 30 minutes where you can work on something. And even if you're doing one 30-minute session a day, that's going to do more for you than doing no sessions a day, or doing all of your sessions, doing 3 hours on Saturday because you haven't scheduled time throughout the week to do half an hour. It's not going to be the same for you. And once you found those little 30-minute chunks, then I would start with maybe one a day and make sure that that's something that you can sustain before filling out a bunch of time slots during your day. So start with like one 30-minute time chunk. If you have that time to get up in the morning, 30 minutes early, I would recommend getting up maybe 35 minutes early or 40 minutes early, so that you have 5 to 10 minutes where you can kind of get out of sleep mode. And especially if you're not used to getting up a little extra early, you have time to get into your training clothes, you have time to kind of get where you need to get to train. If you need to go to a park to do your form practice, you have time to walk there. If you're just going to be training in your living room, then there's less time required there. But make sure you account for that time and give yourself that time by setting your alarm early enough that you can get to where you're going to be training and be ready to train, and you have the full 30 minutes to train that you've scheduled for yourself. If you just get up 30 minutes early and it takes you 10 minutes to walk to the park and 5 minutes to get ready, then you're down to 5 minutes to train and then 10 minutes to walk back home. So that's not going to work. So you have to account for all of those other things. Once you have those time chunks set aside, at least one a day for 30 minutes, then what I would do is figure out what you're going to be doing each day of the week during that time chunk. So one hurdle that can happen is you get up, you're ready to go, and then it's like, well, what should I train? Should I do this form? Should I do that one? Should I just do some stretches? Like, what is it that I'm going to work on? Should I do Qigong? If you're trying to make that decision when it's time to train, then you're basically wasting time thinking about things instead of just getting your training done. What I like to do is do a every other day kind of thing, where I work on one type of thing one day, then I work on something different the next day, and then I go back to a similar thing that was on the first day. And it's just kind of leapfrogging like that. So it depends a bit on what you're training. You might just be practicing one thing, like maybe you're doing Zhang Qigong, and so you just need time in the morning to do that. That's great. You don't have to try to come up with a schedule for that. Maybe you are trying to keep up sword forms and empty hand routines and Qigong and several different things like that. Then it's going to make sense to do kind of an alternating schedule and try to stick to that instead of trying to decide what you're going to do on the day that you're supposed to be doing it. So that's what I would typically do in a normal term. Since we're not really in a normal time right now, I've changed that a little bit. And the only thing that I really changed was I took the time slots that were for travel and for getting ready to go to classes, and I turned those into training time. So I basically just extended my training time into those time slots. And that's kind of nice because it allows me to extend my training time without having to alter my schedule for the other things that I need to work on. So that's how I approach scheduling to try to get everything that I'm doing to fit with the training that I'm wanting to do. And that would work quite well for a set work schedule, which would probably be even easier than a changing class schedule that changes from term to term.